Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and talk about the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now, this phone is actually going to be approaching 3 years old this year, and one thing I will definitely tell you is the hardware of this phone still holds up so crazy well, and I just can't believe Samsung made a phone like this back in 2020 that still holds up this well, that still looks this beautiful. And honestly, there's really not too much to hate on this phone yet. There may be like one thing that's kind of a reach, but when I look at this phone and I look at the S22 Ultra, the iPhone 14 Pro Maxes, all these other phones, this one still so many years later holds up so well it's not even funny. Now, if you want to pick up this phone or some other phones I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this device, you do have that beautiful 6.9-inch dynamic AMOLED display on the front. It's a 1440p panel, and by far it is probably one of the best looking panels that Samsung has made. Obviously, I think the S22 Ultra may look a little bit better. I think the S21 Ultra also had a very, very good display, but the Note 20 Ultra, with its flat sides on the top and bottom, and with its curved side on the side, it just makes this phone look so unique in so many different ways. And this is how the Note lineup always kind of looked like. You know, if you look at the Note 9, the Note 10, the Note 3, all these phones kind of had like this boxy design, and I was so happy when Samsung kept that design with this type of device as well. Now, on top of that, you do have a 120Hz panel here as well, which makes this thing feel so much more smoother than a ton of other competition. So that's kind of another big asset for this device as well. The fact that you have a phone that's this fast, that, feels this smooth is still very cool with a massive display like this. Now, on the bottom, you do have that charging port, the USB-C port, that does have Samsung DeX through it as well, which is basically, for those of you who don't know, it is that like desktop type experience. So, and that is something that is really cool too, that I love seeing on these types of phones. You will also have the S Pen on this device as well, which that in and of itself is really cool. Having that S Pen, which you can just go ahead and plug in and pretty much use as like a stylus or whatever else you want to mess with around with it. It's a really cool thing, and every time Samsung makes some sort of device like this and they give us that feature, it is really cool, and I honestly am just so obsessed whenever Apple does anything like that. Now, on top of that, you do have a microSD card slot on this device as well. So that is another really cool thing is, on top of that, and that's something that is awesome. Having a microSD card slot where you can go ahead and just expand the storage immediately, it's probably one of the most important things that this phone had, because it was one of the last, not only was it the last Note phone so far, but it was one of the last Samsung phones from their main flagship lineup to still have a microSD card slot as well. So since then, they've kind of removed it. It's kind of sad, but it's what it is. There's not much we can do about it, but that was one another really cool thing that they had at that moment. And on the back, we have this frosted glass back as well. Now, with this glass back, you are getting, like I said, it's frosted. It looks very good. It still feels very good as well. You also have that camera setup on the top left corner. You also have, wireless charging and reverse wireless charging on this phone too. You have IP certification. And overall, for the years and years that this phone has been out, I've been kind of saying it is still just a behemoth of a phone. Like, it still feels and looks so beautiful, and that in and of itself is still one of my favorite things that are possibly going through with this phone right now. So in terms of that, by far one of my favorite things about this device, and still something that I kind of look forward to as well. Now on top of that, in this device, in terms of the camera department, it does have that 108 megapixel wide-angle lens. It has a 12 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor. You also have a 10 megapixel wide-angle lens on the front. Now, one thing that I've kind of talked about with this device is that the camera on this thing is still very good. You have 8K capability on the back, 4K at 60 on the front, and that in and of itself is some serious good resolution to have on a device like this, because, looking for the future, there's still a lot of devices that cannot shoot 8K video. Like the Pixels, the iPhones, those things still can't do it. And this device, from this long ago, actually has that capability. So, in my opinion, that is something that's really cool. There's still this kind of caveat where certain applications like Snapchat and TikTok and whatnot, they're still not like super optimized for this type of device, but I think that's totally okay, and over time is definitely going to get better. But I do think with this type of phone, still one of my, probably still a really good camera from 2020 that still holds up very, very well in this day and age. So, in terms of that, gets a thumbs up for me as well for how old this phone is. Now, in the software and longevity department, this is the one area that might start getting a little bit weird with this phone. And what I mean by that is basically this phone, it came out in 2020. Samsung did go ahead and increase the longevity of this phone one time. So I think it's still going to be lasting this year and make it another software update next year as well, depending on what Samsung wants to do. So this phone is not going to be discontinued anytime soon, but I also don't know how long this phone is going to last. It could very well be that this year, maybe One UI 6 could be its last update. Again, we have pretty much no way of verifying this, but it's one of those things that could end up happening. I think One UI 5, from what I've seen from a lot of people post, it seems pretty good for the most part. But with this phone, I am kind of curious to see what it's going to end up happening here. Is this phone going to last as long as the, next generation? I am not too sure, but it is one of those things where the hardware is just so good that it almost seems like when this phone gets discontinued, the hardware that, has succeeded this phone, like with the S23s, S24s, is it going to be better than what this phone had? It's still one of those things. I mean, I feel like Samsung could go ahead and just remake this phone and people would still buy it with newer internals. So in the terms of software, I guess that kind of covers it up there too. In terms of performance, this phone had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside with 12 gigs of RAM on the top tier model and 8 gigs of RAM on the base models. On my specific models, I did have 8 gigs of RAM, and I do think it was a pretty decent performing phone in that matter. Again, it really wasn't like the top tier device of all time, but it got the job done, and I do think in this day and age, it still holds up fairly well in that department. Now, if you're planning on using this phone as like your main device to use every day, I think this is going to be able to handle you perfectly fine. This thing with that 120Hz panel, that in and of itself is a really big deal in my opinion. But on top of that, the fact that this phone still has quite a bit of power with the 865 chipset, that's a pretty big deal. I will tell you though, this phone has gotten a little bit slower throughout time. That's kind of expected, but also the competition, meaning even these successors of these phones, have gotten quite a bit better. We got the 888 of 2021. We got the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1s in the 2022. And now with the 8 Gen 2s, these are starting to look like some really big differences, and we're going to be getting into that massive, bump up in power. So that is going to be something that's going to be very, very interesting to see how those phones compare to this one. I will say in the, power department, this phone still has a lot of power within it, but the competition has definitely gotten better and the newer phones have gotten much, much faster. Now, ending it off, we do have that 4500 mAh battery inside of this phone. And even in that, department, I still think that's a pretty good sized battery. But like I said, since then, a lot of the competition, even, the latest Samsungs do have bigger sized batteries, from this one. So that might be something to keep in mind. If you're wanting the biggest size battery, you might want to look for one of the newer Samsungs because those ones may actually be topping this battery size by now. So overall, what I'll definitely tell you is the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra I think is still a very good phone. This thing has so much power left within it, and as long as you're okay with this phone probably getting discontinued with software within like 2 years from now, then I think that's probably okay. But just know that this phone is still here for you. It's a very good, powerful phone with a bunch of power within it, and I would still recommend buying it. If you want to buy like a Galaxy S22 Ultra or like a Pixel 7 Pro instead, those might be better options here and there. But I think the Note 20 Ultra is still a very good phone as well. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.